Imagine spending your entire childhood as one of the most recognized faces on television. Millions of kids watching you every week, laughing at your jokes, admiring your confidence. And then, decades later, you find yourself strapped inside a racing truck, engine screaming at full throttle, surrounded by 40 other drivers who have spent their entire lives preparing for exactly. Now imagine that in a single fraction of a second, at over 100 miles per hour, everything around you goes silent. Not because the noise stopped, but because your brain can no longer process what's happening fast enough. The truck beneath you is no longer responding. The wall is coming, and there is absolutely nothing you can do. This is not a scene from a movie. This is not a stunt. This is Frankie Muniz, the kid from Malcolm in the Middle, living one of the most terrifying moments of his adult life at Bristol Motor Speedway, in front of thousands of screaming fans, with cameras capturing every single second of it. To understand why this moment hit so differently, you have to understand who Frankie Muniz actually is, and more importantly, who he chose to become after the cameras stopped rolling on his acting career. Most people froze their image of Frankie somewhere in the early 2000s. He was the smart, sarcastic, lovable kid on one of the most popular family comedies in television. At the height of his fame, he was one of the highest-paid child actors in Hollywood. He had awards, recognition, and a career that most young actors could only dream about. By all conventional logic, the next chapter of his life should have been more of the same. Bigger roles, bigger movies, more spotlight. But Frankie Muniz was never particularly interested in doing what made conventional sense, that he stepped away from acting while he was still relevant, still recognizable, still marketable. And instead of chasing another role, he started chasing something that gave him a completely different kind of rush: motorsports. He didn't approach it casually. He didn't do it for a reality show. He didn't treat it like a celebrity hobby. He trained seriously, competed in real racing series, and dedicated years of his life to becoming a legitimate driver. Not a famous person who races. A racer. By the time he entered the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, he had already put in the kind of work that earned him genuine respect from people inside the sport. He wasn't a gimmick. He wasn't a headline act. He was a driver who happened to also be famous. And there's an enormous difference between those. But none of that preparation, none of that experience, and none of that dedication can fully protect you from what Bristol Motor Speedway is capable of doing to any driver on any given day. Bristol is unlike almost every other track on the NASCAR circuit, and drivers who underestimate it pay the price quickly. It is short, just over half a mile around, which sounds almost manageable until you realize that at racing speed, you are completing a full lap in roughly 15 seconds. The banking on the corners is steep and aggressive, designed to push cars into the wall rather than away from it. The track is narrow, the racing is physical, and the margins for error are essentially non-existent. Drivers have called it the most intense, mentally exhausting, and brutally unforgiving venue in all of American motorsports. What makes Bristol so particularly dangerous is not just the speed or the banking. It is the density. 40 trucks packed into a half-mile oval means that everyone is always close to someone else. There is no breathing room. There is no empty space to escape into when something goes wrong. One mistake doesn't just affect one driver. It creates a chain reaction, and by the time the smoke clears, multiple trucks can be involved in something that started with a single momentary lapse in judgment. This is the environment Frankie Muniz drove into on race day. The energy inside Bristol on race day is something that television cameras can capture visually but cannot fully communicate emotionally. The sound alone is overwhelming. 40 engines at full throttle in an enclosed space create a wall of noise that you feel in your chest more than you hear with your. The crowd is loud, passionate, and deeply knowledgeable about what they are watching. These are not casual spectators. Bristol fans understand racing. They understand aggression, and they understand that what they are about to witness may go sideways. Muniz lined up with the rest of the field, focused and prepared. He had done this before. He understood the track, understood his truck, and understood what the race was going to demand from him. His goal wasn't necessarily to win. It was to be competitive, to manage the race intelligently, and to prove once again that his presence in this series was earned and not gifted. For a portion of the race, things were progressing exactly. He was holding position, managing his truck well, and navigating the aggressive racing around him with the kind of composure that comes from genuine experience. But Bristol has a way of changing without warning. The pace tightens, the gaps close, and suddenly a situation that felt manageable 30 seconds ago becomes something entirely different. Then came the moment that would define his entire race day and remind everyone watching exactly how thin the line is between control and catastrophe at this level of motor. Whether it was a slight loss of grip at the wrong point in a corner, contact with another competitor, or simply the unpredictable nature of racing on a track that punishes even the smallest mistakes. Muniz's truck suddenly went from racing normally to completely out of control in what felt like an... There was no gradual warning, no slow deterioration. One moment, he was a driver competing in a race. The next moment, he was a passenger inside a machine that was no longer responding to anything. The truck spun. Tires lost purchase on the racing surface and screamed against the asphalt. Smoke erupted from underneath the vehicle. Other drivers around him, reacting on pure instinct developed through thousands of hours behind the wheel, swerved and adjusted to avoid becoming part of what was unfolding in front of them. For several terrifying seconds, there was no certainty about how this was going to end, whether the impact would be minor, whether other trucks would get collected, or whether someone was going to get seriously hurt. This is the part of racing that no highlight reel ever truly captures. Is the uncertainty. Is the few seconds between when something starts going wrong and when you finally know how badly it went. For everyone watching, fans in the stands, people at home, the crew on pit road, those seconds feel impossibly. The caution flag came out immediately, and the safety crews moved onto the track with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from knowing that speed is everything, and fans who have been on their feet, holding their breath, waited for the signal that every racing crowd needs after a serious looking at. The thumbs up, the movement, any sign that the driver inside that damaged truck was okay. It came. Muniz was responsive. He was shaken, as any person would be after experiencing the kind of violent loss of control at racing speeds, but he was not seriously injured. No life-threatening situation. No catastrophic outcome. Just a driver who had just gone through one of the most intense experiences that motorsport can produce, sitting inside a truck that was no longer capable of finishing the race. His day at Bristol was over. But here's the thing about a moment like this. It means something different depending on who you are, what lens you're looking for. For the casual observer, this is a dramatic story about a former child actor crashing his truck at a famous racetrack. Interesting, maybe surprising, but ultimately just a piece of sports news that moves through the cycle quickly and gets replaced by something else. For anyone who actually understands what Frankie Muniz has been building over the past several years, this crash is something more significant. It is evidence, concrete, undeniable evidence, that he is genuinely doing this. Not performing it, not simulating it for an audience. Actually doing it, with all the real consequences and real dangers that come with competing at this level. Every serious driver in NASCAR history has stories like this. They have all had races that ended in walls, in smoke, in silence. The crashes don't define a career, but they do define character. They reveal whether the person behind the wheel has the psychological composition to come back after something frightening, to process what happened, to learn from it, and to return to the same environment that just reminded them how vulnerable they are. That is the real test of whether Frankie Muniz belongs in this sport, not whether he can avoid every crash, because no one avoids every crash, but whether he can absorb moments like Bristol and continue moving forward with the same commitment and seriousness that brought him here in the first place. Frankie Muniz left a career that most people would have protected with everything they had. He walked away from the safety of a recognizable name and a comfortable life because he wanted something that was genuinely his, a challenge that had nothing to do with who he used to be and everything to do with who he was choosing to be. At Bristol Motor Speedway, that choice cost him a race. It gave him a scare. It reminded him, and everyone watching, that the sport he has devoted himself to is real, demanding, and completely indifferent to fame or history or reputation. But he walked away, and in racing, walking away is everything. The crash is part of the story now, not the end of it, just a chapter, one of many that will eventually add up to something that nobody expected when they first heard the words Frankie Muniz, NASCAR driver. Because the most interesting journeys are rarely the ones that go smoothly from beginning. They're the ones that go sideways, catch fire, hit the wall, and keep going anyway.